All rise. The words had barely left the court clerk's mouth when Officer Ethan Cole looked toward the bench and felt every trace of confidence disappear from his face. Beside him, Officer Jason Miller stopped adjusting his tie and stared straight ahead. The man entering the courtroom in a black judicial robe was someone they recognized immediately. 3 weeks earlier, they had stood beside the same man on a quiet Richmond street and treated him like someone whose explanation did not matter. Now every attorney, clerk, and spectator in the room was rising for him. "The Honorable Judge Marcus Bennett presiding," the clerk announced. Ethan's eyes shifted toward Jason. Jason did not look back. Marcus Bennett walked calmly to the bench, placed a folder beside him, and surveyed the courtroom with the same measured expression he had worn during their first encounter. He did not smile. He did not glare. He simply sat down, and somehow that made the silence heavier. Ethan had imagined this hearing many times during the previous week, but never like this. He had expected an administrative judge he had never met, a routine review of paperwork, maybe a few uncomfortable questions about procedure. He had not expected the black man he once dismissed on the side of the road to be sitting above him beneath the seal of the Commonwealth. Marcus opened the file, but before he spoke, his eyes rested briefly on the two officers. For 1 second, the courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Ethan remembered the first thing Marcus had said that night. Not a threat, not an argument, just a calm sentence that had irritated him because it sounded too confident. "Officer, make sure your camera is recording." At the time, Ethan had taken it as attitude. Now those words felt different. Much different. 3 weeks earlier, Marcus had left a late dinner near downtown Richmond shortly after 9 in the evening. He wore a dark overcoat, gray slacks, and a plain white shirt with the collar open at the neck. His judicial robe was locked inside his chambers several miles away. His official courthouse identification was tucked into a leather wallet in his coat pocket, but nothing about his appearance announced authority. He looked like any other professional heading home after a long day. The October air was cool, and the sidewalks had begun to empty as restaurants closed their patios for the night. Marcus walked toward a parking garage while checking a message from his daughter about a family breakfast planned for Saturday. He smiled, slipped the phone into his pocket, and continued toward his car. Across the intersection, a patrol vehicle slowed. Ethan Cole was driving. Jason Miller sat in the passenger seat. Dispatch had recently broadcast a vague report about a man seen near a closed electronics shop several blocks away. The description was limited: black male, dark coat, approximately middle-aged. Ethan looked through the windshield and saw Marcus. "There," he said. Jason followed his gaze. "That is pretty broad." Ethan was already turning the patrol vehicle toward the curb. Marcus noticed the flashing lights behind him and stopped walking. He did not run. He did not raise his hands dramatically. He simply turned and waited. Ethan stepped out first. "Sir, stay where you are." Marcus looked at the officer, then at Jason emerging from the passenger side. "Is there a problem?" Ethan studied him from head to toe. "We are going to ask the questions." Marcus's expression remained calm. "Then ask them." Something about that answer immediately bothered Ethan. He had already begun forming a story about the man standing in front of him, and Marcus had no idea yet how difficult it would become to make him listen to anything else. Jason Miller watched Marcus Bennett more carefully than Ethan Cole did. The street was quiet. The nearest restaurant had already dimmed its front windows, and the parking garage entrance stood less than 50 feet away beneath a row of yellow lights. Marcus had not moved except to place both hands where the officers could easily see them. "I was leaving dinner," he said. Ethan gave a short nod that sounded more skeptical than satisfied. "Where?" Marcus named the restaurant behind them. Jason glanced toward the building. It was still open, and several employees were cleaning tables inside. "Do you have identification?" Jason asked. Marcus reached slowly into his coat pocket. "Yes." Ethan stepped closer. "Keep your hands where I can see them." Marcus stopped. "You just asked for identification." "I know what he asked." The answer came sharper than necessary. Marcus looked at Ethan for a second, then back at Jason. "May I retrieve my wallet?" Jason nodded. Ethan did not object. Marcus removed the leather wallet and handed over his driver's license first. Jason examined it beneath the patrol lights. The name was clear. Marcus Bennett. Richmond address. Current license. Nothing about it matched the uncertainty Ethan seemed determined to preserve. "This checks out," Jason said quietly. Ethan looked at him. "That does not mean he is clear." Marcus heard the words. Clear of what exactly? Ethan turned back. We received a report about someone matching your description near a business that is closed for the night. Marcus looked down the block toward the electronics shop, barely visible several hundred yards away. What description? Ethan hesitated. Black male. Dark coat. Middle-aged. Marcus let the silence stretch. That describes a lot of people in this city. Jason looked away for half a second. Ethan's expression hardened. You seem pretty interested in telling us how to do our job. I am interested in knowing why I am being detained. The word detained made Ethan's posture change. Nobody said you were detained. Marcus glanced at the patrol car behind them, then at the position of both officers. Am I free to leave? Jason looked at Ethan. Ethan did not answer immediately. That pause told Marcus more than the words that followed. Not yet. Marcus nodded once. Calm. Controlled. He had spent years listening to people contradict themselves in courtrooms, and he knew something about the danger of talking simply to fill silence. So he stopped helping Ethan explain himself. Do you have anything else on you? Ethan asked. Marcus held up the wallet slightly. My identification. My phone. My car keys. Any weapons? No. Anything illegal? Marcus's eyes settled on Ethan's body camera. A small red indicator showed that it was active. Then he looked at Jason's camera. Also recording. Good. Officer, Marcus said. Make sure your camera is recording. Ethan frowned. Why? Because I want an accurate record of this conversation. Jason looked down briefly at his own camera. Ethan's face changed in a way Marcus noticed immediately. Not fear. Irritation. Are you threatening to file a complaint? I did not say that. Then why are you so worried about the camera? Marcus almost smiled, but did not. I am not worried about it. Across the street, a young couple leaving another restaurant slowed when they noticed the patrol lights. Farther down the sidewalk, a hotel employee stepped outside and looked toward the scene. Ethan noticed the attention and seemed to become even more determined to justify the stop. He asked Marcus where he worked. Marcus answered simply, for the Commonwealth of Virginia. Doing what? Public service. Ethan let out a quiet laugh. That is vague. So was the description you stopped me under. Jason's eyes moved toward Ethan. This time, he did not hide the discomfort. Ethan, he said softly, his identification is valid. We should confirm the original call and move on. Ethan ignored him and reached for his radio. Dispatch repeated the initial report. No confirmed crime. No detailed suspect description. No witness identifying Marcus. Jason heard every word. So did Marcus. The logic holding the stop together was getting thinner by the second. Ethan looked down at Marcus's license again, then toward the closed storefront in the distance. He could have ended it there. He could have handed the license back, apologized for the inconvenience, and walked away. Instead, pride entered the space where judgment should have been. Turn around for me, Ethan said. Jason looked at him sharply. For what? Marcus did not move. Officer Cole, he said quietly, reading the nameplate on Ethan's uniform. Before you take another step, I suggest you decide exactly what legal basis you are relying on. Ethan stared at him. Jason stared at Ethan. The body cameras kept recording. And somewhere inside that widening silence, the encounter crossed from a questionable stop into something neither officer would be able to explain away later. Marcus Bennett did not turn around. He remained exactly where he was, shoulders relaxed, hands visible, eyes fixed on Officer Ethan Cole with the quiet focus of someone who understood that every second now mattered. Jason Miller took half a step closer to his partner. Ethan, he said, keeping his voice low. Dispatch did not confirm a crime. Ethan looked at him sharply. I heard the call. Then you heard the same thing I did. Marcus said nothing. The red light on Ethan's body camera continued blinking. Across the street, the young couple had stopped completely now, pretending to check something on a phone while watching the scene. The hotel employee remained near the doorway. Ethan noticed them. Pride tightened his face. Sir, I gave you an instruction. Marcus answered calmly. And I asked for the legal basis. Ethan exhaled through his nose. You matched the description, you were near the location, and you were being uncooperative. Marcus looked toward Jason for a moment. Is asking why I am being detained considered uncooperative? Jason did not answer immediately. Ethan did. You keep challenging everything. Questions are not resistance, officer. The sentence landed cleanly. Ethan stepped toward the patrol car and spoke into his radio, asking dispatch to check for any additional reports around the electronics store. The answer came back within moments. No alarm. No confirmed break-in. No witness currently requesting police. The silence afterward felt almost physical. Jason turned toward Ethan. We need to end this. Ethan stared down the street at the closed storefront, then at Marcus. Not yet. Marcus studied him. What are you waiting for? Ethan looked at the leather wallet in Marcus's hand. You said you work for the Commonwealth. I want to see your employee identification. Jason's eyebrows lifted. Why? Ethan ignored him. Marcus could have ended the mystery in seconds. His judicial identification was inside that wallet. One glimpse of the state seal and the title beneath his name would have changed Ethan's tone immediately. Marcus knew that, and that was precisely why he did not produce it. His driver's license had already established who he was. His title should not be necessary to make basic rights recognizable. My driver's license is valid, Marcus said. You have confirmed my identity. Ethan's voice hardened. So you are refusing? I am declining to provide employment credentials that have nothing to do with this stop. Jason looked toward his partner again. He has a point. Ethan's face tightened. You can stand over there if you are not going to help. Jason did not move. Marcus watched the fracture forming between them. One officer was becoming more determined. The other was beginning to understand that silence could become participation. Ethan reached toward his belt and produced a set of handcuffs, holding them at his side without moving closer. Last chance. Turn around. Jason stepped between the decision and the action with his voice rather than his body. Ethan, tell me what you are arresting him for. Ethan looked at him. Obstruction. Jason's expression changed. Obstruction of what? No answer came. Marcus felt the cool October air move across his coat. He could hear the distant sound of traffic from Broad Street, the hum of the parking garage lights, and his own breathing, slow and steady. Imagine standing on a sidewalk knowing that one sentence could reveal enough authority to end the encounter, yet also knowing that millions of people never get to carry such a sentence in their pocket. Marcus understood something clearly in that moment. If Ethan treated him differently only after learning he was a judge, then the problem had never truly been solved. Officer Cole, Marcus said, I am going to comply with any lawful instruction, but I want you to state clearly, for both cameras, why you believe you have grounds to arrest me. Ethan stared at him for several seconds. Then he spoke. You are interfering with an investigation and refusing lawful directions. Marcus nodded once. Thank you. Jason looked at him. Thank you for what? Marcus's eyes remained on Ethan's camera. For making the record clear. Ethan mistook the calm response for arrogance. He instructed Marcus to place his hands behind his back. Marcus complied without argument. The handcuffs clicked shut, not violently, not dramatically, just with the quiet finality of a decision now preserved on video. Jason looked down at the pavement. He knew there had been another choice. Ethan guided Marcus toward the patrol vehicle while reading him the reason for the arrest. Marcus listened carefully to every word. Before entering the back seat, he looked once at Jason. Officer Miller, your camera is still recording? Jason glanced at the red indicator. Yes. Marcus nodded. Keep it that way. 3 weeks later, those same recordings would be playing inside a courthouse. And the two officers who believed they controlled the record would finally understand who had been listening to every second. The ride to the precinct took less than 15 minutes, but to Jason Miller it felt much longer. He sat in the passenger seat while Ethan Cole drove, the city lights sliding across the windshield in long reflections, and every few blocks Jason glanced toward the rearview mirror. Marcus Bennett sat quietly in the back seat, his posture straight, his expression unreadable. He did not argue. He did not demand special treatment. He did not mention his profession. That silence unsettled Jason more than anger would have. Ethan, on the other hand, seemed determined to treat the arrest as proof that his earlier judgment had been correct. You should have just answered the questions, he said without turning around. Marcus looked toward the back of Ethan's seat. I did answer your questions. Ethan tightened his grip on the steering wheel. You challenged everything. Marcus replied. I asked what legal basis you were relying on. Jason looked out the window. The body cameras were still recording. At the precinct, Marcus was brought into a processing area under bright fluorescent lights. A desk sergeant named Linda Parker reviewed the arrest form while Ethan stood nearby. She read the stated offense twice. Obstruction? She asked. Yes, Ethan said. What was the underlying investigation? Ethan explained the vague report from near the electronics store. Linda looked at the dispatch notes on her screen. No confirmed break-in? Not yet. No witness identification? No. She glanced toward Marcus, then back at Ethan. Did he give you identification? Jason answered before Ethan could. Yes. Valid driver's license. Linda's expression changed slightly. Did he provide false information? No, Jason said. Ethan looked at him. He refused additional identification. Linda turned to Ethan. Employment identification? Yes. Why was that required? Ethan opened his mouth, then stopped. Marcus stood a few feet away, listening. He recognized the shift immediately. The story sounded different under fluorescent lights than it had under flashing patrol lights. Pride had less room to hide when every decision had to be written down. Linda looked toward Marcus. Sir, do you want to provide any additional identifying information for processing? Marcus reached into his personal effects tray and removed the leather wallet. Yes. He opened it just enough for Linda to see the state judicial credential. Her eyes moved across the seal, the photograph, and the title. Then she looked up at him. Judge Bennett. Ethan turned. Jason did too. Marcus nodded once. Yes. The room became silent. Linda looked at Ethan for several seconds, then at the arrest form in front of her. You arrested a sitting judge? Ethan's face tightened. He did not identify himself as a judge. Marcus answered calmly. Because my occupation was not the legal basis for whether the stop was justified. Jason lowered his eyes. Linda looked back at the credential. Does Chief Judge Whitaker know you are here? Not yet. Marcus paused. But he will. Ethan stepped forward slightly. This does not change what happened on the street. Marcus turned toward him. I agree. Ethan seemed surprised by the answer. Marcus continued. That is exactly why it matters. Linda immediately contacted a supervisor and requested review of the body camera recordings before any further processing decision was made. Within 30 minutes, the obstruction charge had begun to look less certain. The supervisor asked why Marcus had not been free to leave after dispatch confirmed there was no reported crime. Ethan repeated that Marcus had been uncooperative. Jason finally spoke. He was not uncooperative. Ethan stared at him. Jason took a breath. He asked questions. He showed identification. He complied when you told him to turn around. The words hung between them. Marcus watched without satisfaction. This was not about winning an argument inside a precinct. It was about the record becoming harder to bend. Before midnight, Marcus was released while the arrest was placed under supervisory review. He walked out of the station wearing the same dark coat, carrying the same leather wallet, and saying almost nothing. Jason watched him leave. Ethan watched too. Neither man knew that Marcus had already decided what he would do next. He would not call the press. He would not use his title to demand punishment. He would file a formal complaint, request preservation of every recording, and let procedure do what Ethan had refused to do on the street, follow the facts. 3 weeks later, those facts would bring all 3 men back into the same room. Only this time the room would belong to the law itself. By the end of the first week, Marcus Bennett's complaint had moved beyond a simple disagreement about judgment and into a formal review of procedure. Internal Affairs investigator Laura Grant sat in a windowless conference room with 2 synchronized body camera recordings playing on separate monitors. On one screen, Ethan Cole was asking Marcus where he worked. On the other, Jason Miller could be heard telling his partner that the driver's license was valid and that dispatch had not confirmed a crime. Laura paused both recordings at the same moment. Marcus stood on the sidewalk with his hands visible. Ethan stood several feet away. Jason looked between them. Nothing about the image was dramatic by itself, and that was exactly what made it important. The review would not depend on raised voices or dramatic accusations. It would depend on sequence. What did the officers know, and when did they know it? Laura wrote the question across the top of her legal pad. She replayed dispatch traffic next. No confirmed burglary. No eyewitness identification. No detailed suspect description beyond race, approximate age, and clothing. Then came Jason's voice from the body camera. His identification is valid. We should confirm the original call and move on. Laura stopped the recording again. Across town, Marcus sat in his chambers beneath the soft morning light coming through tall courthouse windows. A stack of motions waited on his desk, but his attention rested on a short email from Chief Judge Thomas Whitaker. The administrative review had progressed far enough that a hearing would be scheduled. Marcus read the message twice. He knew immediately that his role would become complicated. He was not simply a complainant. He was also a judge in the same court system where some related disciplinary matters could eventually appear. He called Whitaker. "I need a conflict review before anything is assigned," Marcus said. "Already underway," Whitaker replied. "You will not make any final decision involving the officers." Marcus leaned back slightly. "Good. There is something else." Whitaker paused. "The preliminary assignment system placed an early procedural hearing on your calendar before anyone connected the names." Marcus looked toward the docket screen. "Cole and Miller?" "Yes." For a moment, neither man spoke. "Then reassign it," Marcus said. Whitaker answered carefully. "The court administrator is doing that. But there may be a brief appearance required to formally disclose the conflict and transfer the matter on the record." Marcus understood. That was different. He would not judge the officers. He would not decide punishment. He would simply make the conflict visible and step aside. "Keep it clean," Marcus said. "No surprises for theater." Whitaker agreed. Meanwhile, Ethan sat across from Laura Grant during his first formal interview. She placed a transcript of the body camera footage between them. At 9:14, dispatch advised there was no confirmed crime. At 9:16, Officer Miller stated that Mr. Bennett's identification was valid. At 9:18, you requested employment identification. What? Ethan looked down. "I wanted to verify his story." "What story?" "That he worked for the Commonwealth." Laura waited. "Was employment relevant to the reported incident?" Ethan hesitated. "Not directly." "Did he provide false identification?" "No." "Did he attempt to flee?" "No." "Did he threaten either officer?" "No." Each answer made the room quieter. Laura moved to the next page. "Then at 9:21 you arrested him for obstruction." "What specific act constituted obstruction?" Ethan stared at the transcript. "He refused lawful instructions." "Which lawful instruction?" Another pause. Ethan rubbed his thumb across the edge of the paper. "He would not provide the additional identification." Laura looked at him evenly. "Employment identification?" "Yes." "The identification you just agreed was not directly relevant." Ethan did not answer. In another interview room, Jason Miller was telling a different story, not because he was trying to protect himself, but because he had finally decided silence had already cost enough. "I told Ethan we should end the stop," Jason said. "I knew we did not have much." Laura's colleague asked. "Then why did you remain part of the arrest?" Jason looked toward the table. "Because he was the lead officer, and I let that become my excuse." The answer would later become one of the most important lines in the investigation. Not every failure came from the person making the worst decision. Sometimes it came from the person standing beside him who knew better and chose not to stop it. By the second week, the hearing date was set. Ethan received the notice first. Jason received his an hour later. Neither man was told who would make the initial procedural appearance before reassignment. On the morning of the hearing, they entered the courthouse through security, wearing suits instead of uniforms, and sat quietly at counsel table. Ethan glanced toward the empty bench. Jason looked at the seal mounted behind it. Then the side door opened. The clerk stood. "All rise." And somewhere beneath Ethan's growing unease, a memory returned with perfect clarity. A black man on a Richmond sidewalk saying, "Make sure your camera is recording." Marcus Bennett entered the courtroom through the side door with a thin procedural file in one hand, and the same calm expression Ethan Cole remembered from the sidewalk. The difference was everything around him. The dark, judicial robe. The state seal behind the bench. The clerk standing beside him. The attorneys rising without hesitation. Ethan remained motionless for half a second before standing with everyone else. Jason Miller was already on his feet, his face pale with recognition. "The Honorable Judge Marcus Bennett presiding," the clerk announced. Marcus took his seat and looked down at the docket. He did not stare at the officers. He did not allow surprise, anger, or satisfaction to enter his expression. "Please be seated." Chairs moved across the courtroom floor in a soft wave. Ethan lowered himself slowly and leaned toward his attorney. "Why is he here?" he whispered. The attorney gave him a warning look. "Listen." Marcus opened the file. "Before any substantive matter is addressed, the court needs to place a conflict on the record." Ethan looked toward Jason. Jason kept his eyes forward. Marcus continued. "I am personally connected to the underlying incident that resulted in this administrative proceeding. Because I cannot participate in any decision affecting the merits, credibility findings, or potential discipline involving these officers, I will recuse from all substantive consideration." A murmur moved through the gallery and immediately faded. Ethan seemed almost confused. The moment he had feared was not happening. Marcus was not using the bench against him. He was stepping away from it. "The matter will be reassigned to Judge Rebecca Lawson," Marcus said. "My role today is limited to confirming preservation of the record and documenting the reassignment." He looked toward counsel. "Does either side object?" Both attorneys answered no. Marcus nodded. "Then the court will proceed only with those limited issues." Laura Grant sat several rows behind the officers with the internal affairs file on her lap. She watched Ethan carefully. His shoulders had relaxed slightly after the recusal announcement, but that relief disappeared when Marcus turned to the evidence record. "The court has received notice that body camera recordings, dispatch communications, arrest documentation, and supervisory review materials have been preserved. Counsel, is that accurate?" The department attorney stood. "Yes, Your Honor." "Including both officers' body camera recordings from the initial encounter?" "Yes." "Including the dispatch transmission confirming there was no verified crime at the reported location?" Ethan's head lifted. "Yes, Your Honor." Marcus paused. "And including the recording of Officer Miller advising that Mr. Bennett's identification had been confirmed as valid?" Another pause. "Yes." Marcus looked down at the file. There was no accusation in his voice, only sequence. Fact after fact. The exact discipline he had asked for on the street. Ethan shifted in his chair. Jason closed his eyes for one brief second. Marcus continued. "Those materials will remain sealed pending review by the reassigned court and the appropriate administrative authorities. Nothing stated today should be interpreted as a finding against either officer." Laura noticed several reporters writing quickly. Marcus noticed too. "I will also state this clearly for the public record," he added. "The fact that I am a judge does not create stronger rights for me than any other citizen. My title is relevant to this proceeding only because it creates a conflict requiring my withdrawal." The room went completely still. Ethan looked at Marcus differently now. 3 weeks earlier, he had assumed the man asking questions was trying to challenge his authority. Now he was watching that same man voluntarily surrender authority because fairness required it. The contrast was impossible to miss. Marcus closed the folder. "Judge Lawson will hear the matter next Tuesday at 10 in the morning. Until then, all preservation orders remain in effect." He lifted the gavel but did not strike it immediately. His eyes moved briefly toward Ethan and Jason. "One final point. A court does not protect fairness by deciding in advance who deserves it. Fairness is the rule before we know the person's profession, reputation, or title." Then the gavel touched the bench once. "This limited proceeding is adjourned." Everyone rose as Marcus left through the side door. Ethan remained standing beside his attorney, staring at the empty bench. He had entered the courtroom afraid that Marcus Bennett would use power against him. What unsettled him more was discovering that Marcus understood power well enough not to. The week between Marcus Bennett's recusal and the reassigned hearing changed the case in ways neither Ethan Cole nor Jason Miller expected. Internal Affairs investigator Laura Grant spent those days comparing the body camera footage with dispatch logs, written reports, and the statements both officers had submitted after the arrest. The contradictions were no longer subtle. Ethan's report described Marcus as evasive and uncooperative, yet the recordings showed him answering questions, providing valid identification, and repeatedly asking for the legal basis of the stop. Jason's report was more cautious, but it omitted one important detail. He had told Ethan, on camera, that they should end the encounter before the arrest occurred. When Laura asked why that conversation was missing from the written report, Jason sat quietly for several seconds before answering. "I thought including it would make it look like we disagreed in front of the subject." Laura looked at him across the interview table. "You did disagree." Jason nodded. "I know. And you believe the stop should end?" "Yes." "Then why did you continue assisting with the arrest?" Jason stared at his hands. "Because I did not want to undermine my partner." Laura let the silence stretch. "At what point does protecting a partner become failing the person standing in front of you?" Jason did not answer. Across the hall, Ethan's interview was going differently. He remained convinced that Marcus had created the problem by refusing to provide employment identification. Laura placed a transcript in front of him. "You already had a valid driver's license." "Yes." "Dispatch had not confirmed a crime." Correct. Officer Miller advised, ending the stop. Ethan shifted in his chair. Jason was being overly cautious. And what fact justified extending the detention? Ethan looked toward the transcript. His attitude. Laura's expression remained neutral. Attitude is not a criminal offense. Ethan opened his mouth, then stopped. That sentence followed him all the way to the courthouse the following Tuesday. Judge Rebecca Lawson entered the courtroom at exactly 10 in the morning, and this time there was no shock in seeing who sat at the bench. She was a white woman in her late 50s with a reputation for being careful, patient, and almost impossible to distract from the record. Marcus was not present. He had made sure of that. Ethan sat beside his attorney. Jason sat several seats away with separate counsel. Laura Grant took a place behind the department representatives. Judge Lawson began with the body camera footage. No speeches, no accusations, just the recording. The courtroom listened as Ethan asked Marcus where he worked. They heard Jason say the identification was valid. They heard dispatch confirm there was no verified crime. They heard Marcus ask whether he was free to leave. Then they heard Ethan refuse. The room became quieter with every minute. When the recording reached the moment Marcus said, "Make sure your camera is recording," Judge Lawson paused the video. "Why did that statement concern you, Officer Cole?" Ethan looked toward his attorney before answering. It sounded confrontational. Lawson tilted her head slightly. "He asked you to preserve an objective record." Ethan said nothing. She resumed the footage. Minutes later came Jason's warning. "We need to end this." Then Ethan's response. "Not yet." Lawson paused again. "Officer Miller, why did you believe the stop should end?" Jason stood when instructed. His voice was low but clear. "Because we had confirmed his identity and dispatch had not established a crime." "Did you believe there was probable cause to arrest him for obstruction?" Jason hesitated. The entire courtroom waited. "No, Your Honor." Ethan turned toward him sharply. Jason did not look back. Judge Lawson continued. "Then why did you participate?" Jason swallowed. "Because Officer Cole was the lead officer, and I did not stop it." The words settled over the room with more weight than any accusation could have carried. Laura Grant looked down at her notes. Ethan looked toward the empty seat where Marcus might have been if he had chosen spectacle over fairness. But Marcus was not there. He had removed himself precisely so the evidence could speak without his presence influencing anyone. By the end of the hearing, Judge Lawson ordered the full administrative record forwarded for independent disciplinary review and requested that the department examine whether training and supervisory failures contributed to the encounter. Ethan left the courtroom angry. Jason left ashamed. Neither man had been condemned by Marcus Bennett. They had been confronted by something far harder to argue with, their own recorded choices. The days after Judge Rebecca Lawson's hearing felt different for everyone involved. For Marcus Bennett, the change was quiet. He returned to his regular docket, reviewed motions, heard arguments, and carried himself exactly as he had before the night on the sidewalk. But beneath that routine, the case continued moving through channels he had deliberately stepped away from. Internal Affairs completed its review. The department's training division began examining how officers were taught to interpret refusal, questioning, and noncompliance. Supervisors were asked why a vague description had been allowed to carry so much weight after dispatch confirmed there was no verified crime. The investigation was no longer about one bad decision. It was about everything that made that decision possible. Laura Grant sat at her desk late one afternoon reading the final draft of the administrative findings. Ethan Cole had extended the detention without sufficient factual basis. He had treated Marcus's questions as defiance rather than protected conduct. He had demanded employment identification without a clear connection to the investigation. Most importantly, his own body camera showed that the justification for the arrest grew weaker as the encounter continued, not stronger. Jason Miller's findings were different, but no less important. He had recognized the problem. He had said the stop should end. He had questioned the arrest. Yet he had still participated. Laura underlined one sentence in the draft. Failure to intervene can become part of the harm even when the officer did not initiate the decision. Across town, Jason read a similar sentence during a meeting with his attorney and departmental counsel. He did not argue. The shame that had followed him out of the courtroom had settled into something more useful now. Responsibility. "I knew better," he said quietly. His attorney looked at him. "That matters." Jason shook his head. "It would have mattered more if I had acted like I knew better." Ethan's meeting was harder. He sat rigidly while the findings were explained. "So questioning an officer is fine now?" he asked. The department representative answered calmly. Questioning an officer was never automatically obstruction. Ethan looked toward the table. He was making the stop difficult. "The record shows he complied with lawful instructions." He challenged me. "That is not the same thing." Ethan did not respond. For the first time, the language he had used that night sounded different when spoken back to him without the authority of a uniform behind it. Several days later, Chief Judge Thomas Whitaker met Marcus in chambers and placed a copy of the independent findings on his desk. "You are cleared to read the final administrative summary," he said. Marcus looked at the cover but did not open it immediately. "Were the officers given due process?" Whitaker nodded. "Yes." "Were the recordings reviewed independently?" "Yes." "Was Judge Lawson involved in the merits?" "Only through the limited judicial review that was appropriate." Marcus finally opened the file. Ethan would face formal discipline and removal from patrol duties while the department evaluated further action. Jason would also face discipline, though the findings distinguished between initiating the unlawful extension and failing to intervene. Training policies would be revised. Supervisors would be required to document the factual basis for prolonging stops after initial suspicion had been resolved. Marcus read slowly, stopping at the section on body camera preservation. "This should have existed already," he said. Whitaker sat across from him. "A lot of reforms begin with that sentence." Marcus looked out the window at the courthouse steps below. People moved through the afternoon crowd carrying briefcases, backpacks, coffee cups, grocery bags. None of them wore their rights on their clothing. None of them should have needed a title to make those rights visible. Later that week, Jason requested permission to speak with Marcus through formal counsel channels. Marcus agreed only after confirming the conversation would not affect any pending process. They met in a courthouse conference room with another official present. Jason looked different without the uniform. Smaller somehow. More human. "I owe you an apology," he said. Marcus waited. "I knew the stop was wrong before it became an arrest. I told myself Ethan was the lead officer. I told myself I was avoiding conflict. But really, I chose the easier option." Marcus studied him for a long moment. "Why are you telling me this?" Jason swallowed. "Because I keep thinking about what you said in court. Fairness before title." Marcus nodded slightly. Jason continued. "I did not treat you fairly before I knew your title." Marcus's expression softened, but only a little. "Then do not make the lesson about me." Jason looked confused. Marcus leaned forward. "Make it about the next person who does not have a robe waiting for them in a courthouse. The next person who asks a question and is called difficult. The next person whose only protection is whether someone beside your partner is willing to say, 'Stop.'" Jason lowered his eyes. No dramatic forgiveness followed. No handshake erased the past. Marcus did not need one. Accountability was not a performance, and redemption was not a sentence someone else could hand down. It was a decision repeated the next time power offered an easier choice than principle. Several months later, Marcus Bennett stepped out of the courthouse just after 5 in the afternoon, carrying a leather briefcase and wearing the same kind of dark overcoat he had worn the night Ethan Cole and Jason Miller stopped him. The city moved around him with its usual rhythm. Buses rolled past. Office workers crossed the street. A restaurant across the block was beginning to fill for dinner. For anyone watching, Marcus looked like an ordinary man heading home after work. That was exactly the point. Inside the courthouse, the final administrative actions had been completed. Ethan was no longer assigned to patrol duties and had entered a formal disciplinary process that required additional training, review, and oversight before any future field assignment could be considered. Jason had accepted discipline for failing to intervene and had volunteered for a department program focused on peer accountability and lawful decision-making during street encounters. The department had also changed several procedures. Officers were now required to document specific facts when extending a detention after initial suspicion had weakened. Supervisors had to review body camera footage whenever an arrest for obstruction followed a stop based on a vague description. None of those changes carried Marcus's name. He had insisted on that. Reform should not become a monument to one person. It should become protection for the next one. Across town, Jason stood in a training room speaking to a group of younger officers. He did not tell them he had done everything right. He told them the opposite. "I knew the stop should end," he said. "I said it out loud. Then I let someone else make the decision because I did not want conflict with my partner. The room was quiet. Jason continued. That was still a choice. He looked toward the body camera image frozen on the screen behind him, showing Marcus standing calmly on the sidewalk. If you know something is wrong and you stay silent because speaking up is uncomfortable, you are still part of what happens next. Miles away, Ethan sat in an administrative office completing one of the required review sessions. He had stopped trying to describe Marcus as difficult. The recordings had removed that escape. What remained was harder to face. He had interpreted calm questions as disrespect because he had expected obedience before he had established a lawful reason to demand it. An instructor asked him what he would do differently if the same stop happened again. Ethan looked down at the scenario sheet. Confirm the call. Verify the facts. Return the identification if there is no basis to continue. He paused. And not treat someone's questions like evidence against them. The instructor nodded but offered no praise. Learning the correct answer was only the beginning. Living it later would be the real test. Marcus knew none of this when he reached the corner near the parking garage where the original encounter had happened. He stopped for a moment beneath the yellow streetlights and looked toward the place where the patrol vehicle had once been parked. Nothing marked the spot. No plaque. No cameras waiting for a statement. Just a sidewalk. Marcus thought about how easily the story could have ended differently if Jason's camera had been off, if dispatch records had been incomplete, or if he had been someone without access to lawyers and institutional support. Then a young black man in a restaurant uniform walked past him toward the bus stop, headphones around his neck, tired from work and paying no attention to Marcus at all. Marcus watched him for only a second before continuing toward his car. That young man did not know Marcus was a judge. He did not need to know. His rights did not become more valuable because someone powerful might notice him. His dignity did not need a courtroom to certify it. Marcus reached his car, unlocked the door, and placed the briefcase on the passenger seat. Before getting in, he looked once more toward the quiet street. Ethan had once believed authority meant being obeyed. Jason had once believed loyalty meant staying beside a partner even when the decision was wrong. Marcus had learned something too. Justice was not proven by what happened when powerful people were mistreated. Justice was proven by what happened when nobody important was watching. He got into the car and drove away beneath the Richmond evening lights, leaving behind the place where one bad stop had forced an entire system to ask a better question. Not who deserves respect, but why respect was ever made conditional in the first place.